What's going on, everybody? My name is Ben, and welcome back to another episode of Ben Builds with Joe. That's right, we are back on the P-40B by Airfix. Really excited today to go ahead and jump into this kit, start putting some plastic together, and start doing some painting, at least preliminary painting. So first off, let's go ahead and open up the box and get out our references. Now, I want to go ahead and use my detail and scale book here, and I want to go through all the little areas that might use a little bit of detail, such as the cockpit. A lot of times cockpits are notoriously under-detailed. This Airfix kit has a ton of detail. I'm really happy with the kit parts, and I don't think there's any real need to replace them with resin or to add in photo etch, but there is a little bit of room for some improvement. So we're going to do some minor modifications. Also, coloring. Here in the Airfix world, we usually have Humbrol paints specified as the colors of choice. Now, I don't really use Humbrol paints, so I went down to my local hobby store to try to figure out, what colors to get, and they were nice enough to give me this. Now, this is an enamel paint conversion chart for all of Humbrol colors, and it gives you all the equivalent in all the other major paint brands, Testors, Tamiya, all that good stuff. So we're going to be using this along with the other side of this that gives you the actual paint chip colors, and we're going to figure out what colors we need for the interior on our P40. So this is going to be really helpful. And I got this for free just from my local hobby store. But anyway, before we get into paint though, we do have to go ahead and get all the parts and pieces ready, cleaned up, get that cockpit looking good. So let's go ahead and cue up a quick time lapse and jump in, get all the parts ready to go. All right, everybody, we are back, and I have to tell you that the majority of parts here didn't need a whole lot of cleanup, but there are several of these boxes that hang off the sidewalls that have a lot of kind of sink marks and ejection pin marks in them. So you want to go ahead and just clean those up just a little bit. Though I don't know how much you'd actually be able to see, because this cockpit looks like it'd be pretty tight in there. But anyway, it's all good because we're going to go ahead and move on and add a little bit of scratch building, not a lot, just a little bit, and add in some extra detail. Now, these boxes that hang off the sidewall, I'm not really sure what these are, but my references show that a couple of them have a little bit of some 3D structure that kind of pops off the front of them. Like this one right here, I don't know what it is, but there's a whole rectangle that is a little bit farther out, a little step there in that box. So we're going to add that with just some quick styrene, nothing fancy. I'm not even sure if you're going to be able to see it, but I'm going to know it's there, and I think it'll add a little bit of interest. We can look at the actual references as well. We definitely see there is something there, like a 3D relief that comes off that box. So this strip of styrene is going to work perfectly. Also, we need to go ahead and figure out what to do for the throttle. Now, the throttle itself has about 3 cables that come off the front of that and go towards the front of the nose. Now, I'm not going to necessarily add every single wire and every single piece, but I want to go ahead and give it something to at least give the impression that there's something there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some 0.3mm solder. We're just going to glue it down to the sidewall, make sure that it terminates into that throttle quadrant. Then the rest of it we can just cut off when we go ahead and glue on all the bulkheads. So that shouldn't be too difficult. Going to be using some super glue. Just going to take little strips of this 0.3mm solder, cut off the end, make sure it's all glued down, adjust it if necessary, and then once that dries, we can go ahead and paint it. Much like the other side of the cockpit, we do have a couple of areas that we need to go ahead and sand off. because we've got some sink marks in these parts. I don't know if that's really that big of a deal because, again, the cockpit is really, really tight in there, and I don't know how much you're really going to be able to see, but I'm not going to take any chances. The worst thing I could think of is to get all the cockpit together, get it painted, and then look down inside, and one of these sinkholes is glaringly obvious. I don't want that. So instead, I'm just going to take my jeweler files, we're going to sand it all down, bring everything nice and level. I think that's just fine. I don't want to fill everything with super glue and come back and sand it down. I think just taking down some plastic, that's good enough. Then we can go ahead and add in some details, and it'll cover up any blemishes that we might have. One other area too that I've noticed here in my references is there's actually a handheld mic that kind of hangs off to the side. What I want to do is I want to go ahead and create that microphone cable. And to do that, I want to be using some very, very thin wire. This is copper wire. I don't know the exact diameter, but it is very, very tiny. It almost reminds me of a human hair. It's very thin. I'm going to take that though and wrap it around a solid wire. I'm going to create almost like a spring that would look like a coiled wire. Looks something like this. As you can see, I can pull it apart and it has that nice little scalloped effect. And that's going to be really, really nice, I think, because we can paint it black. Probably just airbrush it so we don't glop too much paint on it. I can glue it down onto the inside of the cockpit sidewall. It would be somewhere right around here. And see if I can position this. It won't be the whole thing. It'll just be a front section of that, but it'll terminate here where my first finger is, and it'll start back here where my thumb is. It'll just be that one little strip, but it will add a little bit of character, and I think it looks kind of cool. Now, one other section I do want to go ahead and spice up a little bit is the map holder. On the sidewall of the cockpit, we do have a box that I believe is supposed to be the map holder. And in my references, the map holder has this kind of triangular shaped lid that fits down right on top of that. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut a real quick piece of styrene. I'm going to go ahead and glue that down, and that's going to be enough. In fact, I think this map box should be a little bit higher and farther back because it's a bit more prominent in the reference photos, but I think this is going to be okay because I don't want to scratch build a box. Just a little bit of styrene to give it that extra little bit of detail, and I think we'll be just fine. Once this is dry, we can come back, we can paint up all the sidewalls with that interior green color, and I think it'll look okay. Whether you can see it when the cockpit's closed up, we don't know yet, but we'll get to that eventually. Now, speaking of paint, a lot of the interior colors here on American aircraft tend to be either like an olive drab or this kind of yellowish green. Now, I'm not going to use the yellowish green for the interior of the cockpit. I'm actually going to refer back to the instructions, and the instructions call out Humbrol Interior Green. And that interior green color is not bad looking, to be honest. Now, I do have a Vallejo Interior Green, and it looks to be very, very similar. So I'm just going to go ahead and use that, not worry too much about it, to be honest. Now, since I am painting the interior of the cockpit, I thought it might be a good idea to go ahead and mask off and paint the interior frames on the canopy. But I'm really not that interested in doing any masking today. So instead, kind of looking through these parts and pieces, I noticed something kind of interesting, and I thought I would go ahead and share it with all of you, just in case there's any sort of discrepancies about the front canopy windscreen. Now, if you go ahead and check out my references, you can see right here, we have a picture of a gentleman stepping out of the cockpit of a P-40B. Right up here on the front windscreen, we can notice there are no frames. Instead, we have this rectangular piece of armored glass, and that is represented here in the kit as well. So I'm pretty sure that even though we don't have any framing on this front windscreen, that's actually correct. Because as we can see from the picture, that framing is actually the armored glass that sits behind that windscreen. So that's really cool. That's why I love to get references to be able to find all these little intricate parts and pieces and make sure I'm on the right track. Also, flipping through a little bit later in the book, we can see this picture right here, again, of the windscreen. You can see very clearly that piece of armored glass. And even the caption below says that oftentimes that armored glass is mistaken for framework on the windscreen itself, but it is not. It is actually a piece of armored glass. So we are absolutely fine with leaving the cockpit canopy exactly as it is, just going ahead and painting that armored glass and getting that all set up. So I think we are in good shape. We don't have to touch anything, and it looks like the kit is pretty much on the level. So now let's go ahead and switch over to paint. We're going to go into a quick time lapse. Nothing too crazy here, guys. We're going to use some Interior Green by Vallejo. We're going to drop some flow improver and some Vallejo thinner in there, mix it up, spray it about 10 to 15 psi, and we're going to go ahead and paint all the internal parts of the cockpit, the sidewalls of the aircraft itself, and a few other parts and pieces here and there. So let's go ahead and jump in that time lapse and get it done. All right, everybody, we are back. And as you can see, we have the majority of our cockpit parts and pieces painted up with that interior green color. Now, I think it looks a little bit too olive here, but I think that's okay because once I start kind of weathering it down, adding some shading and all that stuff, it's going to bring it down. I think it's going to make it less stark. But as you can see, we've got the sidewalls, the floor, the bulkhead, the chair, and even the rudder pedals all painted over in that nice interior green. Also the same thing with the sides of the cockpit on the fuselage. Now I did want to mention one thing here in this back area. This is actually a radio compartment. And I was looking through the instructions and I did not see any call out for an actual radio. But it does look like we do have a radio here. So just in case you are interested in adding a radio into this kit, it does come with one. We can see it right here. And that just plugs into the side of that fuselage. So if you ever want to add a radio into the kit, you can. It's right here. You might have to do a little bit of detailing though, but I think it's actually not too bad. But I think we're looking pretty decent for our cockpit color. We have all our sidewalls painted up. We added a few parts here and there, and I think our additions, even though they're not crazy, I think it does add a little bit of interest. And I can't wait to get this wire attached in there too. That's going to be really fun to go ahead and get that installed. So until our next episode, everybody, go out there, get yourself some bench time, have some fun, build something cool. Make sure to stop on by Joe's channel, drop him a like, subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you back here on the next episode of Ben Builds with Joe. We'll see you soon.